Beautiful city of Kona, Kaulia Kona in Big Island. My name is Jong-woo Han. I am the president of Korean War Legacy Foundation, which has about 1,500 interviews of Korean War veterans, not only from the United States, but also other 21 countries that participate in the Korean War. We are doing this to commemorate the special occasion of the 70th anniversary of the breakout of the Korean War in 2020. But we are continue to collect this interview so that we can preserve your memory, first of all, because it's been a long time ago, and to honor your service. But at the same time, Korean War has been known as forgotten war, so that we want to make this interview into curricular resources for the teachers so that they can talk about your witness, direct witness of the Korea in 1950s and your war experience and honorable service based on this interview for their students when they talk about the Korean War in the context of Cold War.
Yes.
It's my great honor and pleasure to meet you, sir, and I want to thank you for sharing your story today, okay?
You're welcome.
So please introduce yourself. What is your name, sir?
My name is Ronald A. Cole, C-O-L-E.
What is your birthday?
February 25th, 1936.
Wow, you are the youngest Korean War veteran I ever met.
Yes.
So you are now 85.
85.
Mm-hmm. You look great, sir.
Trying to hang on.
Yeah. And where were you born?
Santa Rosa, California.
Could you spell it?
S-A-N-T-A, Rosa, R-O-S-A.
Oh, Santa Rosa.
California, Santa Rosa. That's in the Bay Area.
Bay Area, yeah. So tell me about your family background when you were growing up, your parents and your siblings when you were growing up.
Okay, I was born at the end of the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Parents didn't really have any jobs. My father was sort of a mechanic. I remember going from job to job during the day trying to find a job for my father. And as things got pretty tight, I had a little brother. So then they decided to put me in school a year ahead of time. So I got into school at 5 years of age. We had no kindergartens. So I got into school. And in the meantime, my father and my uncle landed defense jobs. This is before Pearl Harbor, but government was deciding to build up because of the threat of Germany. And we really didn't think that much of the Japanese. We thought they were backward, which they showed us they weren't. Mm-hmm. And so we were really concerned about Germany. So my father and my uncle began work at McClellan Air Force Base and worked on aircraft. And they worked on aircraft there, and I went into school and was in school when Pearl Harbor happened. And everybody was amazed because we all thought that we'd be going to war with Germany. But then Hitler declared war 3 days later. So we were in World War II. I lived on a farm. My folks had a little farm. My mother worked, my dad worked, but this farm helped set us up a little bit as far as food. We had chicken. Meat was rationed. The only meat we could get was Spam and Vienna sausage. And then the war carried on. The Japanese showed us that they were much better soldiers than we thought they were. They shelled Santa Barbara. A submarine shelled Santa Barbara. It was a grudge thing because the captain had fallen down in Santa Barbara in the 30s, and a bunch of stevedores had laughed at him. And so they gave him targets of opportunity. He sailed into Santa Barbara and shelled it. Didn't do any real damage, sailed away. They bombed the Oregon forests, but they bombed it in winter and didn't start any fires. And a couple other submarines fired some shots, but it was enough to unnerve everybody. And we still worried about the Germans, but anyway, their submarines ran wild in the Pacific and in the Caribbean. I mean, they ran wild in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. And then, as a youngster, I kept track of the war. And I knew all the aircraft. I knew all the American aircraft, all the Japanese aircraft. And then the war ended, and in 1950, I was in high school when the Korean War started, and a couple of my friends wanted me to go enlist. And I said, I can't. I promised my mother I would finish high school, because most of her family hadn't finished high school because they were during Depression. So anyway, I finished high school, and I was in the Navy Reserve.
But hold on. What high school was it? The name of it?
El Camino High School in Sacramento.
E.L.?
E.L. space Camino. C-A-M-I-N-O. It's Spanish. It means the road. El Camino High School.
I see. And when did you graduate?
I graduated in 53.
So your promise to your mother was carried out.
Yes.
Great. And when you were in high school, did you learn anything about Korea? Even because the Korean War broke out in 1950 and you graduated in 53.
Yeah.
So must have been a topic in the history class, was it? Or
Yes. Yes, it was.
did they talk about Korea at all?
A little bit, yeah.
Tell me, what did you learn?
We learned about the fact that Korea had been called Chosen by the Japanese,
Yeah.
that they had occupied it and taken it over, and that when World War II ended, the Russians wanted to divide Japan the same way that they had divided Germany.
Yes.
And General MacArthur would not let them, so they kept part of Korea and Manchuria and some parts of China, which they eventually gave back sooner. And then the Russians didn't take it very well. And so in the meantime, I had joined the Navy Reserve, and then I realized that the Korean War could probably start again real soon, and the benefits were going to go out in February of 1954. And so I went to the Navy and said, I want to go on active duty. They said, well, we'll take you in April. So I figured, well, they just don't want me having the benefits, and I want to go to college, so I'm going to join the Marines. So I went down to the Marines, and they wanted me to go for 6 years. And I wasn't sure about that, so I went to the Navy, regular Navy, and they wanted me to go 4 years. I had already started a year of college, and they said I had to have 4 years of college to fly. So I went to the Air Force. They wanted 4 years. So I said, well, I want to fly. They said, you have to have 2 years of college. So I went down to the Coast Guard, and as I was walking by the Army office, one of my buddies came out and said, I just joined the Army, and you get your choice of schools. So I enlisted in the Army for military police. They didn't give me my choice of schools. They told me I was officer material, and they were going to send me to OCS, but the only schools were infantry and artillery. Well, artillery attracts artillery.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll take infantry. So they put me in the infantry.
You're smart.
Yeah, they put me in the infantry, and then I was going through infantry school, And they said my company was going to go to Germany. So I said, well, I want to go to Germany, so I'm going to drop infantry. And they said, no, don't give up OCS. Don't give up OCS. So I stayed and then finished my advanced infantry school. And they said, well, the company's going to Germany, but my name wasn't on the orders. And then they came out and they said, Fort Lewis, Washington, which meant Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But before, where did you enlist?
Sacramento.
In Sacramento.
Yes.
And where did you get the basic military training?
Fort Ord, California.
Fort Ord.
Which is Monterey.
Yeah.
So it was pretty extensive because they had learned a lot of lessons during the real fighting in Korea. They were still ambushing each other and dropping shells on each other and things. So anyway, we got pretty extensive military. We went back to bayonet fighting, which they had given up after World War II because the Japanese had used it very proficiently. Germans didn't like it that much. And so we realized when we were in Korea that we should bayonet fight. So a lot of times the North Koreans would run out of ammunition, and that's all they had. So anyway, we got a lot of bayonet fighting, and we got on a troop ship and went to Japan.
When was it?
1953, the end of 1953. And the ship, we couldn't get off in Japan. Everybody wanted to get off. And then we went on to Busan, got off the ship.
When did you arrive in Busan? Can you remember the month?
Yeah, it's December.
December of
53.
53.
And went up to the line and went into an infantry replacement unit. And we stayed in the replacement unit. We were being selected for different units, and they kept talking about artillery, and I kept saying, hey, I'm supposed to go in the infantry. And we stayed up near the line. I can't remember the name of the place. They took us up to the front line one time, and they wouldn't let us take weapons because they didn't want to provoke anyone. And the North Koreans fired a rocket shell. Not a rocket, but a mortar shell. And
At the time?
oh yeah.
What do you mean? That was after the
Yes, oh yes.
ceasefire.
Oh yeah.
But they still...
Oh yeah, they would infiltrate something terrible. And we'd catch infiltrators all the time. But I was only there about 4 or 5 weeks, and we had a polio epidemic. 2 guys and 27 guys came with me. 2 of them got polio, so they rounded all 27 of us up. Took us back to a stockade they cleaned up and made into a detention facility till they could get us on a plane and out of there. And they sent us to Guam and then Honolulu, and then they sent us to Travis Air Force Base and tested everybody for polio. And then I was sent to Chicago, and I manned an anti-aircraft gun there, 120 millimeter, very big gun. But before I got there, we got our first leave, but the people were in very poor shape. And there was a lot of prostitution, and I was afraid to get off the post at that time. But we did all our Army drills, and we were shown all the targets if we were to be attacked, where they expected us to be attacked, where we would reconnoiter, and we would go up and sit in foxholes. And infiltrators did come through, and we did catch a couple. One time we caught an old man.
Where was it? In
near the 38th parallel, up near the DMZ. And we caught an old man digging a hole, and we took him down and gave him to the South Koreans, and they laughed at us, said he was burying kimchi. But we thought it was a mine. Yeah. It wasn't, we had been told that there was a lot of disease, a lot of tuberculosis, VD, and we had shots for most of the stuff they described, but there was things like hives, shingles, a lot of things that there was no vaccine for, like polio. See, when they get polio hit, everybody got excited, and we had only had 2 guys. We go back to Travis, they found one guy who had it, nobody knew it, and he'd overcome it.
What about Seoul? Did you see Seoul?
A little bit, yeah, it was still pretty damaged. But they were rebuilding. Very energetic people. Everybody seemed to be working. The people in the city were cleaner. They were starting to clean up. They had better clothes. But they were very shaky and very worried about the North coming back, especially after China came in. It was quite a problem. And everyone was quite nervous. Of course, there was quite a few infiltrators in there. And we had been warned about them, but we couldn't tell one Korean actually from another. The women looked Asian, but they didn't really look Japanese. They resembled Chinese more. The men resembled both. It was hard to tell. We had some Japanese troops with us, and they themselves couldn't tell the difference. It's like my friend Herb Lum, when he was up at the Chosin Reservoir, he kept catching prisoners, and the only thing that caught his eye to make him think they were different was their uniforms. And their uniforms were different. They had a red star, but they were Chinese soldiers. And he would talk to them. They knew they weren't Korean, and he didn't know what they were. He couldn't understand them. He spoke Cantonese, but these soldiers were nationalist soldiers who had been captured by the communists. The communists had killed their leaders and put them in the communist army. So they really weren't too excited about fighting with anybody. So all they wanted to do was go back to China. But the communist army was making them fight, and they would surrender quite easily, but the communist soldiers wouldn't. And he told me quite a bit about Korea when he was there. And he was our oldest combat veteran. We had another combat veteran named Sid Springer. He was a little younger. He's from Kona here too. Both of them are dead now. But they relayed quite a few stories to me because we had a lot in common. And I was a specialist in firearms and so on. And so we talked quite a bit, and Herb gave me a British rifle he picked up over there from a British soldier. But he had a Russian rifle that he had taken off a dead North Korean soldier. And the North Koreans were supplied by the Russians. And they had quite a bit of Russian equipment, including their fighter planes.
So you left Korea when? 53 or 54?
54. It was after the
54?
New Year, yeah.
Oh,
It was after the New Year. We spent quite a bit of time in December bouncing from Washington State, sailing on a troop ship that rocked and rolled and everybody was sick.
so you were there for 1 year in Korea?
No, I crossed over.
No. You arrived in Busan on December 1953, right?
Right,
And then you left January of 1954.
yeah.
So you stayed in Korea for a year.
Well, no, I was actually arrived in 53. At the end of 53, spent several weeks into 54, and then went back.
Okay.
And that was
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
that was because of the
Polio.
polio.
Yeah.
And they were very excited, very hyped up about it. They took us down to a jail.
Why? Why they are excited?
No antivenom, no vaccine.
Uh-huh.
So they took us down and separated all of us. And then they put us on a medevac plane. And the pilot come back and wanted to know where I was wounded. And I told him I wasn't. Then he asked my friend. He said, well, I wasn't wounded. And he wanted to know why we were on the plane. We told him, well, there's 2 guys in back with polio. And then he went up and locked himself in the cockpit. And we went to Guam, and they wouldn't let us off the plane. And we went to Oahu, and they wouldn't let us off the plane. And we got to Travis, they took all of our temperatures, found the one guy that had it and shook it, and another guy that was coming down with it, and the rest of us they sent back to active duty in different places in the U.S., and a couple other guys got to go to Germany, and I was sent to Chicago, Illinois.
Chicago, right. So, even though you were there a very short time, but still you were able to see how Korea was at the time.
Yeah.
Have you been back to Korea since then?
No,
No.
you had to have got out earlier in 1953.
Right.
Yeah.
And have you followed up with the Korean economy since then?
Oh, yeah.
How well the Korean economy is
Oh,
now?
yes.
What do you know about Korean economy?
I know that they're very hardworking people.
Uh-huh.
I know that they have, over several 100% improved. And you just look at their clothing. Because I go on the internet all the time and look at Korea and Japan, North Korea, China a bit. I wanted to go to Hong Kong, and I've been to Thailand, I've been to Australia, but I wanted to go to Bali, and I wanted to go to Korea and Singapore. Korea and Singapore were really options. I wanted to go to Hong Kong, but I have made it to Bali, not Bali, but Thailand, and I've been around the world. I've been to England and France and with the International Police Association, but I noted that Korea, even the Koreans that came to the U.S., are great people. And when we had the riots in the United States and everybody was bowing away from the rioters, the Korean people didn't. They came in, they set up shop, they put people on the roofs, they armed themselves, and they took care of their property, like other people, like Vietnamese, and just bowed out, just backed out. Koreans are very, very good people, very sturdy people. We had a couple in the police force, pretty good officers, and we've had, when I went into the sheriff's office, we had guys who came from Germany and went into the sheriff's office. They'd be citizens. We had guys from Japan, did the same, and guys from Korea. And I think the Koreans were very, very hardworking and made very good officers.
Do you know ranking of Korean economy in the world do you know now?
I think it's sixth.
Yeah, it's 10th largest economy in the world and
Okay.
6th largest trading partner to the United States.
Okay.
So when did you leave Korea in 1954? Did you ever imagine that Korea would become like this today?
No, I thought it was going to end up like North Korea.
Uh-huh.
Japan had surprised me, how it had come back, but I wasn't allowed to get off the ship. But when we were in the port, we could look and see the city. And the people looked well-dressed and everything.
But you never imagined that Korea would transform like this today?
No, I did not.
Yeah. You know, the
thought-
Korea is just a little bit bigger than the state of Indiana. That's
Yes.
it. Small
Yes.
country, nothing really
No.
vertically standing at the time you left.
Yeah.
But now it's the 10th biggest economy in the world. What do you think about that?
I think it shows the courage and energy of the people. Because I actually expected the North Koreans, who are exactly the same people but have a different philosophy, would take it over. I figured that if we would pull out, that they would try again, and then it would be taken over and become a big communist state. But I was sort of hoping that they would realize that these people south of us have it better than we do, and they would eventually merge, which will probably happen eventually. But they have to have a change of heart with the people higher up.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So are you proud to be a Korean War veteran?
Oh, yes.
Why?
Because I felt that I accomplished something going over there. Seen a lot, helped out a lot while I was there, and wished I'd have been there a little longer. And I've joined a couple of Korean War veteran groups, and problem with our group is that we didn't. When we come back, the American Legion really didn't want us. And
Why not?
because they figured they fought World War II and we were just a police action, so we built our own. Well, that has come back to bite us because most of our guys are all dying off now, whereas the Legion took it's the young people.
Yep.
They still send us mail wanting us to join, but a lot of the old guys won't do it because of what happened back in the 50s. See, so I've never joined the Legion. I got in the Korean War Veterans. I figured that was good enough. I was president of the local chapter for years. I still am, but we're down to about 6 members now. In fact, we even started letting the wives come to the meetings because we're running out of members.
So when did you move to Big Island?
1999.
Why? Because you like it?
California was getting sort of liberal and crowded, and I don't like the cold, and I don't like the heat. Sacramento would get up to 110 in the summer, and down to 32 in the winter. It'd snow every 10 years or so, but not too often, but it would really get cold. And when I worked in the police, I would have to work midnights in the fog, and we would get terrible fogs. So Sacramento was not the best place for me. California had other places, and I looked, and I wanted to stay close to the ocean, but the ocean there is cold, and the ocean in Oregon and Washington is
Yeah.
cold. So I eventually just figured I'd been here. I'd been to all the Hawaiian Islands. I liked them. So I came back to Big Island, seemed to be the best. So I came here. Then I met Sid Springer, and he was a decorated veteran of Korean War and Vietnam War. He had the Silver Star, and he was starting the Korean War veterans here, and he wanted me to join, so I joined, and we had about 40 members, and it just dwindled down. I am the youngest so far.
Yeah.
And-
So During your stay in the 38th parallel DMZ area, were there any other action that you were involved or any other story that you want to share with this interview? Anything you remember?
I remember we went up where we could see the line and see the North Koreans, and somebody on their side fired a shell. It was a mortar shell. And we don't know what provoked them. They wouldn't let us take our guns up, which was probably a smart idea, because we had a lot of little people that would have probably fired or something, but we didn't really have anything to shoot at. We could actually see them, but somebody fired a shell, and it didn't hit anybody or anything, but it scared us. And the sergeant who took us up was very excited and run us all down. And one of the guys thought he was hit, but he had defecated in his trousers. Oh. And he thought he'd been hit in the leg. And he was very ashamed of himself. But we told him, artillery does that to people. That's why I didn't want to go in the artillery myself. But then we had infiltrators, like I said. Mm-hmm. And one night we went up and we sat in foxholes. And then the guy that relieved me come up, and I left, and I knew about infiltrators, so I didn't want to stay in my hole. So I went and crawled off and stayed back a ways, and then the next day, the guy that relieved me, he come down and he says, you left your souvenir behind. And I said, what was that? And he gave me a Russian mess kit, which some North Korean infiltrator must have dropped by my hole.
Yeah.
So I was glad they hadn't stayed in the hole.
Okay. What do you think about the, still the Korean War has not been replaced by peace treaty and still divided and still technically at war? What do you think we have to do?
Well, first thing you got to do is gain the trust of the North Koreans, and they don't trust anybody. The person who's running it right now is similar to Hitler, and he's off his rocker a little bit. Now he's talking about his sister running it. Mm-hmm. She, I don't know anything about. But if it runs in the family, you might have a real problem with her. Somehow you've got to gain their trust, but that's going to be awful hard to do with their mentality.
Yeah.
And I did talk to a person who had walked away from North Korea, and he said that they are very, very brainwashed. The Germans were too, during World War II.
Right.
And they came around after they lost, but somehow you've got to get into North Korea and change those people's minds to where they will actually join up with you and become the same. And Korea would, if it did that, it would be a lot stronger economy. Things would be much better. China would probably not like it that much, but they would probably still trust you. Mm-hmm. Whereas if North Korea was taken by violence, by warfare, China would probably step in again. Maybe even Russia. Okay. I don't know.
All right. So what would you say to the young generation about your service as a Korean War veteran? For the young generations in America who do not know much about Korean War, what would you say to them?
The Korean War happened. We were very lucky that we had a president who did his duty and stood up for what we believed in, sent the troops. The troops that went were outnumbered. They fought hard. They kept the line until we could get more people there. If it hadn't been for the intervention of China, we probably would have got the whole place under their own rule. Mm-hmm. But the war kept going. They wanted to end the war. And they took MacArthur out because Truman was afraid he would use the bomb. And then when Eisenhower got in, said he wasn't against using the bomb, then China wanted to talk. So anyway, we got the war stopped, but I was disappointed that when we got to Chosin, that we hadn't sent feelers to China to tell China we're not interested in China. This is not an American action, it's a UN action. And North Korea and Korea should be able to decide their own destiny.
Yep.
And they should get it together and become their one country. And I was very disappointed in the fact that China stepped in, because it was almost over. I mean, they could see the river. They were sitting there looking at the river.
Yep, you made very important points, many good points, and I would like to thank you again for sharing your story, unless you have any other episode you want to add to this interview.
Well, not a lot happened to me in Korea.
Right.
I didn't go out on leave that one time I had a chance because I was afraid of ED. And I'd seen all the movies. Mm-hmm. They show you these horror films. And one of my friends had gone out, and he came back very disappointed because the people were very, very desperate, and they were selling their daughters. And they weren't well off, you know. They were, and a lot of them hadn't recovered. And they were very worried about China and North Korea. Yeah, but any time they were afraid China would just take over. And they'd taken over all these nationalist armies that hadn't made it to Taiwan, and they just put them into service. And a lot of those prisoners we had down on those islands were nationalist soldiers who got the chance to surrender. They immediately surrendered. And even our soldiers that were fighting said they got better treatment from if they were captured by the Chinese than by the Koreans. Koreans just shot everybody. Okay. And so we all wanted to see Korea get free. And then the majority of us were very disappointed that it didn't happen.
Thank you again for such a wonderful sharing of your stories. Thank you very much again, and I want to thank on behalf of Korean people for your service during your 1953 to 54, and I hope that you can maintain this local chapter as long as possible. We'll make sure that this interview will be uploaded to the internet so that teachers and students can hear from you, okay?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.